Once upon a time, the Ranger was one of the best-selling and one of the best-known mid-sized trucks in North America. But then Ford decided to do something stupid, and they created a business case study that I'm sure is going to be shared in business schools around the world for decades and decades. They canceled the Ranger for a full 7 years, and instead of those customers flocking to the Ford Fiesta as Ford had assumed, no, I am not kidding with that. They really did think that the Fiesta was going to take the place of the Ranger because they thought people were buying the Ranger because of its low price tag, not because of the fact that it was a truck. So what actually happened? Well, all of those customers flocked to Toyota. And so when we take a look at the rise in Tacoma sales, you can actually largely thank Ford for the rise in Tacoma in the mid-size segment. We now have the second generation of the return of the Ranger for North America. And even though the design was still headed by the Australian side of Ford, this is certainly more appropriate for the North American market. And that's part of why that Ranger didn't come to the US right away. They thought that it was just a little bit too small, certainly a little bit too narrow for American tastes. And this generation has fixed that. So we get a track, it's about 2 inches wider. The body is wider as well. We had a completely redesigned frame that also gives us a longer wheelbase. So let's take a look around the Ford Ranger. I've now driven all three versions of the Ranger, the 4-cylinder, the mid-level 6-cylinder, and the Ranger Raptor. So we're gonna take a quick look around the outside, and then we're gonna take a much deeper dive into exactly how the Ranger stacks up against the competition and why I think this might be the Ranger that Ford could reclaim some of those sales back from Toyota with. The model we're looking at today is a rear-wheel drive Lariat trim. This one wears an MSRP of around $47,000. That's definitely above the base price of $34,315 with the destination charge, but logically you're going to be paying less for this than the Tacoma on the dealer lots, unless you're talking about the absolute base version of the Tacoma, which doesn't really have a corollary in the Ford lineup. You can see that up front they decided to give the Ranger some sort of mini F-150 looks, but it's not exactly a scale model of that F-150. This model has full LED headlights here with the LED DRL circling that. We also have the LED fog lights below. This particular trim also has the Wrangler Territory all-terrain tires on it, which are not my favorite tire, and I do think that's kind of an odd choice, especially for a two-wheel drive model. This one has the optional locking differential, but without four-wheel traction, I just don't understand the point of the all-terrain tires personally. We have well-integrated steps back here just below the bed, and parking sensors both front and rear in this particular model. Metal bumper down there on the bottom, of course. 2-inch hitch receiver right there. There's a little bit of a tree in there, apparently, it looks like. I'm not sure why that is. Over here we have a 7-pin and a 4-pin wiring harness connection. When properly equipped, you can tow up to 7,500 pounds in your Ranger. The metal tailgate borrows some features from the larger F-150. We have an LED light shining down there on the hitch receiver and on the bumper, which is rated to tow 3,500 pounds when equipped with a bumper-mounted ball. We have a backup camera right there integrated into the Ford logo that's nice and high mounted, so you really do get a really good view, especially with that LED light at night, of exactly what you're backing up into as far as connecting a trailer. That's a nice touch. Now, every version of the Ranger is going to have the same bed and the same cab exactly as you see here. So 4-door cab, 5-foot bed. Interestingly, this does not get some of the features from the Maverick. So even though we have what look like very similar tethers here to hold the tailgate in place, you can't reconnect them and flip and fold them as easily as you can in the Maverick. That's something that I would love to see come to the rest of their truck lineup. As you can see, it is a damped tailgate, so we do have that, that damper right there to help damp the motions. As you can see, we have a bunch of different stuff right there in the bed. Same mounting points that we found previously for the Ranger, although some of the dimensions are different here. So even though some of the mounting points look very much the same or very similar, keep in mind that not all of the accessories from other generations of the Ranger will fit on here. Over here we have our integrated 12-volt power port and 120-volt power port, so no 240-volt ports. Remember, this is not a hybrid or a mild hybrid, so the onboard inverter is relatively low output in comparison. Also, no power tailgate like you'd find in the bigger Ford trucks. We do, however, have well-integrated blind spot monitoring. It's actually integrated into those taillight modules, which is a nice touch, so that way it's going to be better at knowing that your trailer is around. So again, all models are going to be a 4-door cab, so we have seating for 5 back here. Let's take a look back here in the rear. We have a armrest right there, 2 cup holders in it. Shoulder belts obviously coming out of that seat back right there, but as you can see, it's in kind of an odd spot as far as its anchor location in the middle. So if you're trying to put child seats in here, you should know that the center child seat is probably going to interfere with the outboard buckle simply because of exactly where this shoulder belt is actually coming out of the seat itself. Also, you should know that the seat bottom cushion does not flip up. It is fixed in place right there. Instead, Ford prefers a 100% folding seat back right like that. If you took the headrests out or the head restraints out, you would be able to fold that almost completely flat, but there's not a lot going on here in terms of storage. You just drop stuff right there on that seat back. We'll take a look at the interior in more detail, but keep in mind we are driving the Lariat trim, which has the upgraded screens in the dashboard, something certainly to keep in mind if you're looking at those base trims. And of course, we have the leather upholstery here with 2-way adjustable lumbar support for the driver. Very similar seat going on over there for the passenger. But let's take a look at what's going on under the hood, because this is part of what I think is really going to help Ford reclaim some sales from the Tacoma. It's the strangely extensive engine lineup in a vehicle that is far from the best seller in this segment. We have a 2.3-liter 4-cylinder engine in this model. I asked for this one because this is probably going to be the best-selling engine. It produces 270 horsepower, 310 pound-feet of torque, so significantly more power and torque than we find in the base engine in the Tacoma. Remember that in the Tacoma, every model is going to have a turbocharged 4-cylinder, but the power output is not the same across all of those different trims. You get less power in the base model. If you want more oomph, and some of you probably do, there's also a 2.7-liter twin-turbo V6 borrowed out of the F-150. That's the one that I am most intrigued about because it gives you 315 horsepower, a whopping 400 pound-feet of torque, and logically performance very similar to the F-150. If you want to go completely bonkers, there's also a 3-liter twin-turbo V6 in the Raptor producing 405 horsepower and 430 pound-feet of torque. So definitely a lot of power. All of the engines are mated to a standard 10-speed automatic transmission. No manual transmission is on offer here. Fuel economy, that's going to be obviously the best in this 2.3-liter 4-cylinder turbo. You can get up to 22 miles per gallon combined, about 25 miles per gallon on the highway if you treat it very gently. 4-wheel drive is optional with this engine. It does appear at this point in time that if you want either of the twin-turbo V6s, then 4-wheel drive does become standard, and logically, your fuel economy is going to drop a bit. Now let's take a deeper dive into the interior. The first thing to know is that there are going to be 2 different instrument clusters and 2 different infotainment systems depending on the version of the Ranger you're looking at. Also, keep in mind that when they're talking about screen sizes, they're talking about diagonal measures. So both of these LCDs are 12.4 inches diagonally, even though it really does appear that we have more screen real estate in this central screen. It's not the same LCD, just smushed from one side to the other. The smaller infotainment screen is going to be a 10-inch infotainment screen. The smaller instrument cluster is going to be an 8-inch instrument cluster. This software has been largely borrowed out of the F-150. The control for it is over here, so you can cycle through things like your trip computer, your off-road information right there, pitch and roll if you want that display on there. This display is not as configurable as I might like. It's always something that I've kind of wondered about with Ford's software. For instance, you don't find any full screen navigation, anything like that. You can't really adjust the theme of the display too much. Those are things that I would love to see. On the other hand, over here, I know this is not everybody's favorite format for an infotainment system, but I think it actually works in here. The interior is certainly narrower than the average half-ton truck, and this does give you a pretty large Apple CarPlay readout if you're a fan of smartphone projection. One thing I do find a little bit silly, though, is that down here, it's actually a little bit difficult to see on camera, but down here we have a lot of repeated physical and touch buttons. We have, of course, you can adjust the temperature here, but then we also have a temperature knob there. I much prefer the knob, so I think they should have just used that section of the screen for, I don't know, something else, anything else really. You can see we have the latest apps that you also find in vehicles like the Mach-E and the F-150. There's even a sketch app. I'm not quite clear why you really would need to sketch in your car. And if you prefer more of a dark mode look to the display, you can give this display a dark mode as well. The vehicle does have auto hold, so there are a few vehicle settings and vehicle functions that are going to be found only here in the touchscreen infotainment system. And then, of course, we have those physical buttons below The dashboard style, that's borrowed some things out of the larger trucks in Ford's lineup. We have these kind of honeycomb vents here, which are unique, but then we have a dual glove box. Ford calls it a hidden glove box, but I'm not quite clear why they're saying that since it looks an awful lot like a pickup truck glove box to me. We then have a storage tray there. It's kind of a rubbery mat, so that way you can keep things like smartphones in there. And then a bin-style glove compartment that was not able to fit an 11-inch tablet computer inside. Again, keeping in mind that we're in the Lariat trim, the options and the trims on the doors, etc., those are going to change based on the trim. We have ambient lighting that's going to be shining right from underneath this soft touch section right here onto what kind of looks like a Formica countertop section. That's an attractive look at night. Soft touch materials on the entire upper section of the door, including a squishy armrest right there, but hard plastics lower on the door, of course. The bolstering on the seats is a bit more aggressive than we find in some trucks. I'm really happy with that. I find that a lot of the mid-sized trucks in the US, they have very flat seats, and they just don't do a good job of holding you in place if you're out on a trail or just, on a rougher road. And you will find, of course, different seats in the Ranger Raptor, as you might imagine. Down here at the bottom of the center console, we have a wireless charging mat, nice deep storage area there, some little storage bins. A pretty chunky shifter here. I kind of wish this was a little bit smaller because we have cup holders that are not as big as I would like. These are on the smaller side of things. The mid-sized Starbucks takeout drinks, mid-sized takeout drinks from McDonald's or whatever, they should be fine. But some of those larger drinks, the cup holders are a little bit closer together, so the lids might be bopping one another. Back here we have the parking button. This takes you to the automated parking function and to an option in the touchscreen where you can turn on and off the parking sensors. So it's kind of a coordinated thing there. Auto start, stop, disable, locking rear differential. This is a two-wheel drive model, but over here we have the drive mode selector, the tow haul button there, and this also has some of the active trailer assist functions borrowed out of the larger F-150, and this one also has an integrated trailer brake controller. It's worth noting that a lot of car companies say they have integrated trailer brake controllers available in their mid-sized trucks, but it's not always going to be a well-integrated module like this. In some of the trucks, it's going to be more of an aftermarket-looking knob that doesn't really fit with the button theme in the vehicle. I like the fact that Ford's actually putting one there in the dashboard. Here's the engine start-stop button, but you can see it's kind of canted at an unusual angle right there, integrated into that console. Moving back to the center here, we have a padded armrest, and that opens to reveal a pretty large storage area, but obviously this is not as big as an F-150, so you won't find quite as much storage there. Now, versus a Ford Maverick, this interior definitely has a different vibe. So we have the vertical screen rather than the horizontal screen. Some of the materials in here are more premium than in the Maverick, so that's definitely one reason to upgrade. For instance, the soft touch materials here on this portion of the dashboard, those are definitely more premium, but on the upper section of the dashboard, you'll still find hard plastics there. We have slightly nicer audio systems, so center channel speaker right there, but there's definitely a lot of similarity in terms of the core level of functionality. Over here on this side of the steering wheel, we have the adaptive cruise control buttons, volume up, down, track forward, backward over there. And this is a manual tilt telescopic steering column. It has a pretty decent range of motion, which is certainly something that I like. One of the other things you won't find on the Maverick is over here, we have a 3-position driver's side memory for the driver's seats. That's a nice touch if you have extra people in the family that are all driving the same vehicle. Moving up to the ceiling, we have the chunky module right there behind the rearview mirror for the active safety cameras. We then have a button for the power sliding rear window, sunglass holder right there, and sun visors that slide to the side. Something that I do appreciate because not everybody in this segment offers that. All right, let's get the Ranger out on the road. When you floor it, you will definitely notice that we get a lot of power and a lot of torque from this 2.3-liter turbo. 0 to 60 happened in this model in 6.3 seconds. And there is a traction component to this because if I come to more of a complete stop here and the road surface is anything less than perfect and I floor it, you will get just a little bit of a chirp from the rear wheels. Obviously, there is a bit of turbo lag. It takes just a little bit of time for the turbo to get on the boil, but there's no appreciable difference between this and the turbocharged options in the Colorado or the Canyon, or of course the elephant in the room, which is the Tacoma. The Tacoma, it also has a turbocharged engine. Really the main entry in this segment without a turbo, as long as we're not talking about some of the unibody options, is going to be the Nissan Frontier. That retains a pretty stout 3.8-liter naturally aspirated V6. So if you want more engine braking or you just like the feel, the way power builds in a naturally aspirated engine, I would go in that direction. The Honda Ridgeline is a really interesting entry in this segment, and clearly we're going to dive deeper into comparisons in a moment, but not everybody wants to put it in the same grouping as this and the Tacoma, Colorado, etc., because it is a unibody pickup truck, and that makes it relatively unique in this segment. This is a traditional body-on-frame truck, the same sort of construction that we find in an F-150, Silverado, etc. Back to the numbers though. 60 to 0, that happened in 129 feet. That's a little bit on the long side. I blame the all-terrain tires on this model for that. When it comes to the handling score, I'm going to give this a B. You'll certainly notice that there are going to be better on-road driving options in this segment than the Ranger, and that's not just something like the Honda Ridgeline, thanks to that unibody design and the fully independent suspension. I would argue that certain versions of the Colorado are also going to handle better, or the Canyon. The wider body format that we find in some of those models, it's not standard on the Colorado, mind you, that definitely leads to better handling feel out on winding mountain roads. And of course, we have the new Tacoma in the limited trim, which has some novel features that I think lend themselves to better on-road capability. In that particular Tacoma, we have a full-time four-wheel drive system, finally, with a true center differential. We also have an adaptive suspension system, and everything there makes that limited trim just a little bit more capable, a little bit more interesting when we're talking about on-road handling. Now, obviously, the first thing you're going to notice when we get this out on a gravel road like we're on here is that we don't have four-wheel drive. And that is certainly something that I would get if a Ranger was on my shopping list, but logically, if you want to save money and you want to save fuel, then you want the rear-wheel drive model, because even though the combined fuel economy number is pretty similar with the four-wheel drive model, you are going to get better fuel economy out on the open highway. So certainly a reason that you'd want to get this model. Now, if you're worried about traction in some limited situations, we do have the availability of the locking rear differential, but that's not going to be as handy as four-wheel drive. It's going to get you out of some situations, but not a world of situations. Now, when it comes to the ride quality out on a rougher road surface like this, the best description for the Ranger is pickup truck and a little bit bouncy, because you'll definitely notice that the suspension, especially in the back, is firmer than something like a Honda Ridgeline. Logical because of the payload demands and the towing capability we find here. This will tow up to 7,500 pounds, and with that comes a reasonable amount of payload. But also there is just the payload in the bed and the fact that you have to have stiffer springs for that. Depending on the truck you're looking at in this segment, you'll find a better ride in the average Jeep Gladiator, likely because of its off-road orientation, but also certain versions of the Toyota Tacoma, because Toyota now offers an adaptive suspension in the Tacoma, which is something I would love to see in some of the other trucks in this segment. It would make a lot of sense for a small vehicle like this that still is trying to have nearly 2,000 pounds of payload capability to have an adaptive suspension system so it can help quiet the bouncy ride down out on rougher roads like this. You'll also notice that a bigger truck like an F-150 or a Ram 1500, etc., they're generally speaking going to have a slightly more sorted ride due to the added weight of those trucks and the size, the wheelbase, the general dimensions, etc. That helps them have a slightly cushier ride out on rougher road surfaces, even though payload and towing figures may not actually be that much higher. Now, none of this is unusual or specific to the Ranger, and that's why I'm still going to give this a B+ when it comes to the ride quality. I do like the ride quality in the Ranger Raptor a little bit more, but keep in mind, it's basically segment average when it comes to the ride. On the subject of fuel economy, it's important to remember that this is a rear-wheel drive Ranger and it has those all-terrain tires on it. This particular model is rated for 21 city, 25 highway, 22 combined. We've been averaging just over 21 miles per gallon over a week of mixed driving, 21.1 mpg. That's pretty solid for this segment. You honestly won't find that much better fuel economy in anything else out there. And that's kind of sad, let's be honest, because you could also get a Maverick with 40 miles per gallon combined. And size-wise, it's not that much different than this Ranger. And that's all because manufacturers in this mid-sized truck segment have been steadfast in their commitment to trying to deliver off-road capability, towing capability, extra power, and they really haven't been as focused on fuel economy as Ford decided to be with that Maverick. Size-wise, again, the Maverick is not that far off of this. They're both technically sort of mid-sized trucks. The Maverick is certainly not as compact as some people might want to believe that it is. It's about 200 inches long or so. And that does have a factor on practicality versus fuel economy. If you're worried about that ratio, that blend, obviously Maverick is the way to go. But you're going to have to give up a solid amount of towing and hauling and payload capability, etc. You can tow up to 4,000 pounds in the Maverick all-wheel drive hybrid. Thankfully, you can finally get all-wheel drive in that hybrid model, but that's a lot of capability lost versus this truck. And if I were going to tow 4,000 pounds all the time, and that was something I was really concerned about, I would probably get the Maverick. Performance is going to be better. We have more horsepower. We have more torque. We have a regular stepped 10-speed automatic transmission with a very normative feel. So if you're okay with the CVT-like feel that we find in the Maverick, you can go that direction and save some fuel. If you want more of a traditional feel, you should just stay here with this. But any way you slice it, fuel economy, it's going to be pretty similar to the average in this segment, and certainly below some of those alternatives like the Maverick. Something that's also an alternative like the Hyundai Santa Cruz, it's going to be pretty close to this. It's not going to be that much different because even though it is smaller, it doesn't have a hybrid system available. Of course, what's really interesting with the Ranger lineup is that we have a selection of engines available. If you want 400 horsepower, you got an engine there. If you want mid-level horsepower, which is the direction I think I would go in, we have the 2.7 liter turbo. That's basically the base engine in the F-150, but I think it's a fantastic pairing with the Ranger. It makes this feel like it's the fastest entry in the segment when it's not. That's actually going to be the 400 horsepower Raptor version, but it's a solid upgrade versus the model that we're driving here. You do have to give up some fuel economy. It goes down to 20 miles per gallon combined. The bigger difference seems to be out on the open highway, where it is certainly going to be less efficient than this. But the next thing you should know is that the cabin noise scores are going to vary based on the version you're looking at, especially when we're talking about the Raptor. And with the Raptor, that all has to do with the tires. It gets even more off-road oriented, even more knobbly tires on it. And that is going to have an impact on the cabin noise scores. In here, I measured 71.5 decibels at 50 miles an hour, making this about average for the mid-size segment, but certainly louder than the average half-ton truck. If you're really on the fence, you should keep in mind that there's certainly going to be half-ton trucks out there that are more fuel efficient than this, quieter than this, may handle better than this, and are going to be faster 0 to 60 than this. Really, the play with a mid-sized truck like this is its mid-sized price tag, and of course the fact that it's going to be easier to park.
The base price of the Ranger is not the lowest in this segment, but mid-level trims I think are a solid value, and the upper-end trims are a surprising value, I have to admit. Because when Ford announced the Ranger Raptor was coming to America, I kind of assumed that it would be priced like the new TRD Pro, or certain versions of the Gladiator, or the up-level off-road trims of the Colorado and the Canyon, and instead, it's significantly cheaper. From the factory, it's going to top out at around $60,000, plus, of course, any dealer markups or dealer-installed accessories that you might want to get on it. But from the factory, the Ranger Raptor, with that powerful twin-turbo engine, it's about $60,000. And a Colorado and a Canyon, they'll top out at nearly $70,000. The Tacoma's about $5,000 more for the TRD Pro. And the Gladiator is bonkers because it gets over $70,000 in the top-end trim. Now, the Ranger is going to be a little bit more expensive than Frontier or Ridgeline, but you're going to find things in the Ranger that you don't get in the Frontier or the Ridgeline, like the turbocharged V6s. And it's not just one. There actually are a reasonable number of engine options available in the Ranger, which is the other interesting twist. Now let's dive deeper into the competition. Clearly, we need to talk about that Tacoma a little bit more. The Tacoma has had some reliability stumbles lately, and the jury is still open about what exactly Toyota is going to do about that. So that is something we should talk about here. There apparently have been some issues with the hybrid system. I chalk that mostly up to smoothness of that system and people misunderstanding it, but there have been some genuine concerns about the newer 8-speed automatic transmission that Toyota is using in that truck. We don't exactly know what this will turn out to be, whether it's simply going to be some dealer service bulletins or whether it might prompt a recall like we saw in the Tundra, but it is something to keep in mind. I think more of a rational concern for most folks is simply that the 2.4-liter turbo is not the smoothest entry in this segment, and it's not as powerful as a lot of the competition, whether we're talking about the GM competition or the Ford or even some of those side models like the Nissan Frontier, etc. The Frontier has a lot of standard power. On the other hand, there is a huge variety of Tacoma to choose from. Because Toyota sells so many of them, they can afford to give us a long bed and a short bed and a small cab and a big cab, etc., etc. There's also a work-focused version. That, I think, is a really great idea from Toyota. There are obviously the hybrid versions. You can get a full-time all-wheel drive system effectively in your limited trim. Lots and lots of great things to choose from. And if you want factory off-road performance, you can choose between the TRD Pro and the new Trailmaster. I'm probably forgetting that name right. The Trail Hunter. Whatever that thing is. Toyota offers 2 different off-road versions. Actually, more than 2, really, because they're also the lower-end off-road versions of the Tacoma. Anyway, there is a complete rainbow of Tacoma to choose from. So definitely a solid reason to go there. On the other hand, pricing flexibility is not really Toyota's forte. So expect to pay right around MSRP for your Tacoma, even with the troubling teething issues, I should say, that we've seen so far in that model. Next up, we have the Colorado and the Canyon, the mid-sized twinsies from General Motors. Both get a 2.7-liter 4-cylinder turbo, and that engine is available with a variety of different power output levels, depending on exactly which trim and which model you're talking about. The body, it's basically the same between the two vehicles, and the interior is very similar as well, but the GMC does have the wide track standard, whereas you get the narrow track standard in the Colorado, and you can work your way up into the wide track in different levels of trim. The other thing to know is that when we're talking about the top-end off-road models, those do get pretty spendy on the GM side, but there is kind of a reason. GM has partnered with a number of companies, most specifically AEV, to produce bumpers and accessories for the trucks. And that means that if you're taking a look at the Bison or the fully loaded versions of the other truck, they kind of look aftermarket. And that can be a pro for some and a con for others. If you want that really integrated factory look, you're going to find that in the Raptor. If you want that more rugged, more industrial, more aftermarket look, you'll find that in the Colorado and in the Canyon in their 2 top-end trims. The big reason, of course, for our next competitor, which is the Jeep Gladiator, is if you want a rock-crawling, basically pickup truck Wrangler. That is what the Gladiator is all about. It's not about pricing, it's not about efficiency, and it's certainly not necessarily about practicality in some ways because the dimensions of the Gladiator are a little unusual for this segment. It is pretty big, though, as far as the cargo area goes, and the Gladiator has one of the highest tow ratings and payload ratings in this segment as well. Because the Gladiator is an interesting blend of design cues from the Ram 1500, from the Wrangler, and everything was kind of jammed together under a unique frame. And some of the body parts are shared with the Wrangler, but not as many as you might think. It certainly looks like a Wrangler, but it's not exactly a Wrangler really in formula. However, when it comes to capability, it is very much going down that Wrangler direction. So the skid plates, the modular bumper designs, etc. It's very, very Wrangler, and the capability is quite Wrangler as well. You just don't get very many engine options. Well, really no engine options at all there in the Gladiator these days. And, of course, we expect some pretty big price cuts to come soon because Gladiator sales have really fallen through the floor. And I think the only way that Jeep can fix that is by refreshing it, giving us maybe a plug-in hybrid or a hybrid, and drastically dropping the price. But we don't know exactly which direction they're going to go. Moving on to the Ridgeline. Well, actually, we'll move past the Ridgeline because we should talk about that when we get a new one. So let's just dive into the Nissan Frontier. This is the discount truck in the segment. And if I were looking for just the best deal, it would absolutely be the Frontier. Also, if you're looking for a naturally aspirated V6, it's a solid option. And because Nissan is trying a little bit to take on Toyota, there are a few more body options. You can actually get the King Cab in the Frontier, which is kind of a cool twist. The Frontier is a really solid basic truck, I would say. But if you want off-road ability, if you want more power, if you want better features, you're going to find that basically everywhere else. I have to admit, though, if I were shopping in this segment, in a rational world, a Ridgeline is a really solid option just because it's so pragmatic, it's fuel efficient, easy to drive, easy to live with, etc. I have to admit, though, Frontier would probably be really, really high on my shopping list, unless I wanted to spend more, and then I would gravitate towards the Ranger, assuming I could afford the turbocharged V6 engines. I really, really like the fact that they're tossing in those turbo V6s, but keep in mind the pricing can get pretty hefty. Deals seem to be found on those mid-level Rangers, but let me know if you've bought one recently and what kind of deal you got down there in the comment section. I would say in this segment, it's hard to go wrong with any of the options except for the Gladiator. Poor Jeep. And at that, it's just the price really on the Gladiator. I think if it was $10,000 less expensive, I'd be Team Gladiator all day long because I really love that boxy look. But it has gotten a little bit too expensive, and there's really no justification for that expense, at least in my book. Let me know what you think about that as well down there, and I'll see all of you next week.